I have to say, I feel like a rock star. This is amazing.
Wow, so many wonderful humans out there.
Not so skeptical now, are we, about psychology?
Love life and enjoy every moment.
But thank you. Hey, it's lovely to clap like that. That really is nice, because when I do these kind of events, I always go home and the kids say, "Hey, Daddy, did they clap?" Yeah. I don't need to tell them that it was out of politeness. You know, hopefully you'll get a clap at the end, but we'll see how we go. I'm curious. I mean, it's you guys read a bit of a blurb. Indira gives me a nice little welcome on stage, so you've got a little bit of an idea of what I do. Some of the more perceptive of you will probably have picked up that I'm not Australian. Although yesterday I filed my Australian citizenship papers because I figured after living here 18 years, you know, it's probably time to get that in. But I am interested in who you are, and granted, there's too many of you to get too deep. But just by way of show of hands, I'm curious as to how many of you might have something that you'd love to be able to do, but you can't. Just by way of show of hands. And you don't have to get too deep. I'm not going to ask you to share, but it might be, you know, you'd like to play the guitar, you'd like to learn a language, you'd like to move your company forward, you'd like to do public speaking, you'd like to be a better parent, you'd like to be a better sibling, I don't know, you'd like to be a better partner. But there's things holding you back. And in the work that me and my team do, essentially we meet people where they're at and do what we can to help them get closer to where they either want to be or they need to be. And a lot of the time people think we're going to go in and give them a new skill set. And whilst that might be appropriate down the track, one of the first things we try to do is work on their mindset. Richard gave a wonderful talk earlier where he used different optical illusions to talk about how we perceive things. I often use something similar with people I'm working with in order to get them to realize that the context we put around things often stops us seeing from the reality. The context or the narrative stops us seeing what's possible. And I extend this by saying your mindset is that context, it's that narrative. It's what you take into every single decision, every single interaction. The reason you sat where you sat this morning, it was impacted by your mindset. The way you're sitting right now is impacted by your mindset. Whether you're now thinking about, geez, how am I sitting? What's this bloke thinking about the way I'm sitting? Whether you're thinking that or not is impacted by your mindset. And mindset is such a broad topic, and we're just going to focus very briefly on two elements of mindset, this idea of the fixed or the growth mindset. I said we're going to go very briefly. I'm going to give you a link at the end which will enable you to join me in an online course which I've developed just to complement this particular talk for all of you guys. It's entirely free, and we can spend a few days getting a bit deeper with it. But the fixed mindset came from an original theory called the entity theory of intellect. If you hold an entity theory of intellect, what you believe is people are either born smart or they're not. You've got a certain level of intelligence, and yeah, you know what? You can go to school, you can work hard, but if you've not got the goods, we're kind of killing time here, you know. Nowadays, we don't necessarily talk so much about intelligence per se, but we tend to narrow it down. We tend to get domain specific. So we might say something like, look, I'm not saying you're not smart, but it's quite clear that numbers aren't your thing. You know? Or, you know, he's a great guy. He's a great guy, but he's just not a natural leader. He just doesn't have it. He's not got what it takes. And if you hold this to be true in a deficit position, you basically will choose to opt out of things because it's not for you. If, on the other hand, you hold an entity theory of intellect or a fixed mindset about how good you are, you genuinely believe you're the smartest person in the room. And to be honest, this will go a whole lot better if you just get out of my way and watch the magic happen. Now, sometimes this plays out in the corporate sense as micromanagers. I've got to give you the job to do, but I don't trust your intellect or your ability to do it, so I'm going to be over your shoulder every step of the way. I don't know if you work with that person. So, if we hold a fixed mindset on stuff, if you do, these are some of the things that you might expect to see. People in a fixed mindset tend to avoid challenge. So in a deficit situation where I don't think I'm smart enough, I've not got the goods, I'm incompetent, this is the person who, the fixed mindset is essentially the person who would rather be the best player on the worst team than be the worst player on a better team. Even though being the worst player on a better team is going to make you a better player, they're not interested in that. They're interested in just protecting their status. So they avoid challenge. They do just enough to prove to others that they can do the thing. You might have friends who seem incredibly competent but never go for that job promotion, citing all manner of reasons as to why it would be a silly decision to go for that job promotion. It's the person who doesn't put their hand up in staff meetings around the boardroom table because, they're scared that their idea won't pass muster. But the thing is whether it's parents trying to challenge a kid, whether it's a boss, a colleague, a coach, it's our role to challenge these people. And the thing about challenge is it feels like this. So if I said to you, right, happiness and its causes, for the rest of 2018, I'm challenging you to do this, and you all went, yeah, sweet, let's do it, let's go, then that's not really a challenge. That's more of a to-do list. But if I said, come on, we're going to do this, and you go, yeah, whoa, that sounds, whoa, what did he say that? Don't know. That's how you know it's a challenge. And because you're educated and you've been around for a bit, you know that means there's a risk of failure. There's a chance you might not come up to the standards that either you or others set for you. And when you don't come up to those standards, people with a fixed mindset give up. That's it, we're done. I knew it wouldn't work. I told you it wasn't for me. Have you ever thought about going to the gym? Yeah, I tried it once. There are people in this room who still have a gym membership just thinking by having a gym membership they'll get fitter. Paying $30 a month. Doesn't seem to be doing anything. And the reason we give up, or you might be in a business where you come up with an idea, no, we tried that once, didn't work. The reason it didn't work is because you tried it once. And the reason we give up is because we're not that keen on effort. Imagine the kid who ever since they were this big has just been, oh, he's brilliant. She is just a natural. Now the problem with that is when adults are saying this about kids this big, what we tend to mean is, wow, they're the best little kid we know. And when that kid, whether they're just brilliant at piano, sport, academics, you name it, when they get to about this big, we whack them in a classroom or a change room or an orchestra pit with loads of other kids who were really good when they were that big. And it turns out that they didn't really have to try that hard when they were this big to be the best. Now all of a sudden, I'm having to work my socks off just to be average. And a lot of kids don't like that. They'd rather be the big fish in the little pond. And effort is seen not as the pathway to mastery, but seen as proof that somehow they're losing their ability. And this is compounded because a lot of them don't just see this as things they do, they see it as who they are. And if mum and dad or aunt and uncle or gran and granddad keep going, oh, so proud of you, you're wonderful at the piano, you're a wonderful mathematician, you're just a natural on the sports field. The minute they start to question that, they start wondering, well, what does this mean for my parents? Do they still value me for this? A lot of us ignore useful feedback, and we've been doing it ever since we've been this big. In your businesses or wherever you come from, this is how feedback reviews and performance reviews work. You go into the performance review hoping for some positive feedback. Why? Because you work your backside off for that place, and it'd just be nice to be acknowledged and know that you're valued. And usually because leaders have been on a course which says, now when you're giving feedback, start with a positive. Your feedback session starts with a positive. And you go, if your feedback starts with a negative, just strap in. It's going to be a long one. But it starts with a positive, and then, of course, the course directs leaders. Now, get to the nitty-gritty in the middle, right? Get to the bit that you want to talk about. And it might just be a question. How come you went about it like this? And rather than actually engage with that question in an authentic, meaningful way, we get our back up, the hairs on the back of our neck stand up, and we start justifying why we did, rather than genuinely opening up and questioning and thinking about what we did. And then we finish with the positive, because that's what the leader's been told to do. And the leaders finish that meeting thinking, oh, they will be suitably inspired to go and work on that thing that I've brought up there. In reality, what you do, of course, is you leave that feedback session, you leave that debrief to go and debrief on the debrief. You're not going to believe what they said to me. What we know is this, that after a feedback session, if you've not got the feedback that you were looking for, you go to find a group of people who will give you what you were looking for. We've been doing it since we were this big. The kids at school said, I've got a big nose, Mum. That's your grandfather's nose. Dan, you be proud of that nose. Strong character, that nose. And yet we continue to do it with adults rather than engaging, and that's why most feedback processes at work don't work. Because we're threatened by the success of others. We're intimidated. We get jealous of it. If they're more successful than me, does that make me a loser? Recently in Australia, there's been some excellent examples of where we see high performers get threatened by the success of others. On the cricket field in South Africa recently, and I take no pleasure in this as an Englishman, we saw two phenomenally gifted cricketers pull in the most junior player on the team and coerce him, essentially, to cheat. Now, people would say that's down to the conditions of South Africa, and Warner was being vilified, and there was so much pressure. I'm going to put it to you that the actual build-up for that probably started when these kids, young men, were about 12. And they were just put on this pathway that that's what we value for, that's who you are, and if you aren't successful, it's not about a sport, it's not just a game. This goes to the very fabric of who you are and what you contribute. We need to be mindful of this. I would argue that perhaps the Banking Royal Commission has highlighted similar issues as well. To put it down to pure greed or incompetence would be very short-sighted. A lot of the people who are seemingly greedy or incompetent would have been some of our highest performers in the school system. I just find that interesting. So the growth mindset really wants to challenge this, because often we say, I can't do it. I couldn't see any other way. When in actual fact, more often than not, we won't see it any other way. We choose not to. Now, to be clear, this is not about telling penguins that if they flapped harder, they could fly. Because speaking to penguins in itself would be a waste of time. But rather, it's recognizing that each one of those things are choices you make. Now, clearly, choices can be affected by your thinking. But I want to highlight how making a subtle change here in our behaviors, we can then impact our thinking. So what I want you to consider is this. The growth mindset is one that recognizes we all have a backstory. You know? We all arrive to this day with various degrees of success, setbacks, trauma, wonderful stories, whatever, that brings us to this point. But that's essentially what it is. A fixed mindset would say, well, you know, what can I expect? Look at the start they had in life. Can't do much with that. A fixed mindset comes with a full stop. I'm no good at maths, full stop. Can't play guitar, can't sing to save myself. I'm not a natural leader, full stop. A growth mindset essentially comes with a comma. I'm rubbish at maths, comma, but it'd be lovely to be able to help my kids out. I don't know how many of us, when our kids present that year 3, when did they change maths? You'd have thought it was a fairly constant thing, right? Apparently not. You know, and some of us will say things like, oh, you know, don't ask me. Go and ask your mum. Or I, you know, have heard some parents go, oh, don't worry about maths, son. You won't need to worry about that when you're older. Got calculators. Which is true. But unfortunately what you find is that kids start developing these genetic excuses as to why they can't do things. What we need to do is, if you're on it, seek out a challenge. Get onto YouTube if you don't know how to do the equation. Get onto YouTube if you don't know how to, play guitar. Find a mentor. Find a challenge. Take yourself into that stretch zone. To be clear, I'm not telling you to go and do something you don't want to do. Find that thing that you would love to be able to do, and go and stretch yourself in the next half of this year. Make sure you persist, but not at all costs. One of the worst appropriations or misappropriations of growth mindset has been this idea that we tell kids that they should never give up. Never give up might make for a wonderful Instagram meme or Nike t-shirt, but it's crap life advice. You know people who, for the sake of their own well-being or those around them, really do need to let something go. They stay in toxic relationships because what would people think if I gave up? They pursue unobtainable dreams to the detriment of other areas of their life, to their relationship with their own kids. Persist, but not at all costs. But to that end, you do need to be able to revel in the struggle. You've got to be okay when things aren't okay. The problem is loads of people like the idea, just not that keen on the work it takes to get there. They love the idea of the beach body. They love the idea of the big house, the car. They love the idea of playing professional sport, just not that keen on the sacrifice and work it takes to get those things. You've got to learn from feedback. We hate having our practice questioned, whether it's as a parent, as a partner, or as a colleague. So a challenge for you in 2018 might be, go and find someone you trust and ask them to come up with 3 questions about what it is you do and how you do it. Literally find someone to go and question your practice and have a conversation about it. Get better at getting feedback. Yeah, could do. And be inspired by the success of others. Not copy them, but be inspired. What can you learn from? One of the best things you can do to get better at stuff is go and hang out with people who are better at things than you are. As I said, that was a brief whistle-stop tour. The one thing I do not want you to do is go home tonight and sit across from your partner and go, I think you've got a bit of a fixed mindset. That will not end well, and you will get feedback, let me tell you. Rather, jump into that free online course, that link there, danhaesler.com/GM. You can see more about what we do there, but that's a free program just for you. And also, my book is on sale here, and I'll be signing it at morning tea. Every single cent in profit from my book goes to supporting the Indigenous Literacy Foundation that go to remote areas. They go to remote areas of Australia, delivering books and programs to our hardest to reach communities. So far, the book is just on the tip of raising $30,000. So with your help at morning tea, let's see if we can get over there. Thank you so much. I can tell my kids you clapped. Thanks for having me.